How many people do you have in person?
In person, around 15.
Wow, nice.
So it's not too bad, and maybe online 10. Probably a few people missed
Good crowd.
new URL, so it's fine. We had a good pizza, so it was very tasteful. And beers. Oh,
Kijk,
kijk.
iemand geeft het goede voorbeeld hier.
Okay, let's start. Welcome everyone, especially online. Welcome to Liam, and special welcome to my nephews in Indonesia. It's still late for them, but I'm very proud they're also online. I'm Henk. I'm co-founder of Dayclocks. Dayclocks is an application for people with dementia, so people we can give people some rest with our application. And also, I'm founder of IonicHub.nl. That's a website especially to promote Ionic. So if you have special examples or nice examples, please submit it to me, and I can put it on the website.
It is Dunstan and not Mohawk. I have no idea how it works. Dunstan works with vendors to set it up, right? That's and
What was he telling me? I'm not sure how Ionic works. Yeah, so hello everybody on the other side. My name is Kevin. I'm a front-end / mobile developer at Ionic. So I think we are competitors to each other company-wise, but
Maybe
Hank,
we can improve our relationship.
I guess so. But Hank contacted me beginning this year, to take over the Meetup group because it was for sale.
Exactly.
So we took it over and yeah, now we are trying to reboot it. So yeah, that's about it. That's about the story. Yeah, something about myself. So like I said, I'm working at Ionic, and maybe you have heard of it, but yeah, it's located in Maastricht, but also in Utrecht, Maastricht, Amsterdam, and other offices as well. And I'm coming from Sittard. Maybe you heard of it, maybe you didn't. And I'm using Ionic for a couple of years now. So a couple of apps that we have built with it is Hans Nieuwe and the Limbus Mooiste app. And the last app we built is the iCapture app. And the iCapture app is an app to track your motion data and give you analysis about it and improvements how to train correctly and securely. So, like I said, Meetup group. So what's the purpose of this group is bringing together like-minded Ionites. Not even sure if that's still I'm not sure a thing, Ionites, but
you can ask Liam.
Yeah. So brief history about this group. Not sure if everybody can see. Yeah, so I think you were already there at 2015, right? Meetup.
2015, yes.
Yeah, so that's the first meetup for Ionic, and then it grew a bit for a couple of years, and yeah, then something happened. For 3 years, nothing happened on the Ionic meetup group, and not sure, maybe it was the interest into Ionic or some kind of pandemic that happened, but at a certain moment, like I said, Hank contacted me, and yeah, we're trying to boost this group again. So that's the first one in 2021. So how will this look for the future? In future, I think our plan is to have 2 to 4 Ionic Netherlands meetups per year, physically and or hybrid. So this is a hybrid one. People joining from around the globe, so that's a good thing.
Maybe if you go to Maastricht, it also will be a hybrid one.
That's another country, right?
Another country.
So at this moment we are at the red marker, and yeah, the next event probably will be in Utrecht or Eindhoven, or maybe that marker over there. But let's see. And I will combine it with a weekend package, and yeah.
Our speakers first will Liam tell something about the new version 6 of Ionic. I hope it will be released today. I'm still hoping. Next, after this, we have a Q&A with the Ionic team, and afterwards, Elwin will talk about the great four-layer Express app. And a little bit on forehand, to thank Liam for his presentation. I found a very Dutch bakery in Boston. So you get a voucher for $20. You can eat lots of Dutch bagels in Boston. So Liam, take it away.
All right, thank you. Let me share my screen. I think you might need to enable screen sharing.
Not yet.
It says host has disabled participant screen sharing for me.
Okay.
I think it's there should be like a security button that you can click, I think.
Oh, yeah.
Oh. Oh.
Oh, there we go. Perfect, thank you. All right. Oops, hang on, let me move Zoom out of the way.
Yeah.
All right, can you see that okay?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here. Next time I'm going to get Ionic to fly me out. So next time, hopefully it'll be in person. Thank you to the organizers for setting this up. This is really great. I know it's been a bit for many meetup groups because of the pandemic. So I'm excited to see us getting back together, both virtually and in person. So I'm Liam DeBeasi. I am the team lead for IonicFramework. My Twitter handle is on the screen. You can follow me there. I like to tweet out upcoming features to Ionic, so it's definitely worth a follow if you're looking for the new and exciting things coming in Ionic. Oops. So today's agenda, we're going to be talking about Ionic 6, what's new in that first. Then we'll get a quick talk about what's coming after Ionic 6. And then once that is done, I'll hand things back to Hank, who will help us get us set up for our next part, which is some question and answer. So let's get started talking about Ionic 6. So for people who are unfamiliar, Ionic 6 or Ionic is our open source UI toolkit. It has over 100 UI components that you can use with Angular, React, Vue, and more, or no framework at all. So Ionic with Capacitor is the best way to build cross-platform apps using web technology for iOS, for Android, as a PWA, as a mobile web app. Ionic is the best way, in my opinion, to do that. So let's take a look at Ionic 6. So Ionic 6 has a lot of new things. So let's sort of break it down. So we've added new components, we've improved our desktop support, and we have expanded tooling options for how you build your apps. Despite all of the things that we've added, we've also improved their performance by reducing the bundle size. And we've updated our components to use the latest iOS and Android designs, which we'll get into in a few slides. And through all of this, it's been really important to us to make sure that the upgrade process is very easy. So Ionic 6 has about half as many breaking changes as Ionic 5. So the upgrade experience should be pretty easy, pretty quick when Ionic 6 comes out later this year. So let's take a look at some of the new features coming. So this first one, we've updated our inputs to use the new material design styles. So we've revised Ion item, and we've added this fill property, which lets you add the outline style, which you see in the demo on the right. And we've also added a solid style, which adds a shaded background. We've also added helper and error text slots. And this is really nice if you have form validation, say Angular form validation, and you want to use the error text slot to give some sort of feedback to the users as to what is wrong in their form that they need to correct. We've also added a character counter, which is also useful when you have an input that has like a maximum number of characters. So the character counter will show you the number of characters you've entered, as well as the maximum number of characters. So we're really excited to get this out. This is a pretty big change to the inputs in material design, and we think it makes the apps look a lot more native. So one of the other features we've added, which is a little hard to see in this demo, but when you get your hands on the actual code, you'll be able to see it, is we've added an fading header and footer in iOS. And so what this is usually in iOS now, the header and footer backgrounds will be transparent, they'll be hidden. And as you begin to fade, the header and footer backgrounds will fade in. You can see this on a lot of stock iOS apps like the Settings app, the Podcasts app, I think the Messages app, and the Mail app. So this is a pretty common feature that first popped up, I think, in like iOS 14, and it's becoming more and more common. So we've added the collapse property, or updated the collapse property on the header and added it to the footer as well. And this is all coming in Ionic 6. One of the other components that we've added is the accordion component. So the accordion component is really great for managing large amounts of data and organizing them in an easy to understand way. So you can collapse and expand data as needed, as you can see here in the demo. It packed with really smooth animations. It has keyboard support, so you can tab to and from each accordion and use the space key to expand or collapse. And we've also added built-in reduced motion accessibility. So if you have the reduced motion preference set on your phone, the animations will be disabled automatically. The next component is breadcrumbs. So breadcrumbs you might not think is a big component that you'd find in mobile apps, but it's becoming more common on iPad apps, and it's been pretty popular on desktop applications. So breadcrumbs provide really important context to your users in terms of where they are in your application and how they got there. So you can have sort of a trail, a breadcrumb trail, so to speak, of the navigation path that users have taken through your application. So you can collapse it, you can expand it, you can get all the information about what has been collapsed, and you can customize it using the built-in themes. We think this is going to be really powerful for more complex applications that are run on tablets, devices with larger screens. So one of my favorite components, and this demo is actually a little bit outdated, but one of my favorite new component updates is to date time. So date pickers, as I'm sure you all know, are very complex and need to account for many different use cases. So in Ionic 6, we have completely revamped the date time component to use this brand new calendar picker that you see on most iOS and Android native applications. So we have a lot of the same features as before, but one thing that we've taken a big focus on are two things: performance and localization support. So performance, it's very fast. It uses the browser's built-in smooth scrolling. So the performance is great even on lower end devices, older devices. We've also added a big focus on localization. So the date time component has some localization features built in that will automatically detect the locale. So for example, if your phone is set to Spanish, the month, the days of the week, they will all show up in Spanish automatically. There's other localization features that we've added that weren't really there before in Ionic 5, but we've since added because we realize how important it is to have a calendar picker that makes sense for each user depending on where they are in the world and what language they speak. So in addition to this automatic locale detection, we've also added a locale property. And so what this means is you can pass in a region and a language, and the date time picker will use built-in browser APIs to automatically convert the days of the week label, the month label, to the language and the format that users are going to expect. Previously in Ionic 5, we had, I believe it was a property called picker format, which let you pass in an ISO 8601 string that dictated the exact format of everything. And that was really powerful, and it gave you a lot of flexibility. But the feedback we received is that was really, it was really confusing and hard to use, because you had to know, okay, what's the difference between a capital H and a lowercase h in this situation? So with Ionic 6, we've broken these features out into separate properties to make them easier to use. And one of these features is the hour cycle property. So depending on where you are in the world, you might expect a time picker to say 11 o'clock p.m., but in other places in the world, you might expect it to say 2300. And so the hour cycle property lets you control exactly that. It lets you say, okay, I want it to show up as 11 p.m. or I want it to show up as 2300. Similarly, depending on where you are in the world, the day of the week may be Sunday, it may be Monday, it may be something else. And so this first day of the week property is going to let you customize which day of the week that the calendar starts on. So there's more locale features that we're looking to add, but we think this sort of set is a pretty good start. So as usual, please file any feedback you have on our GitHub repo, any suggestions for improvements. You know, it's easy for me as a developer to say, oh, well, you know, of course I want it to say 11 o'clock p.m. or the day of the week begins on Sunday, because that's what I'm used to. So especially people that maybe aren't based in the US, your feedback is really, really important. So that's a lot of the new features coming in daytime. So the next one that I know people are very excited about and have been asking for quite some time is the bottom sheet component. So ever since Ionic first launched, it's been really important to us to provide components that let you build rich interactive experiences. And we think the bottom sheet is exactly that. So when Ionic 6 ships, the bottom sheet feature will be available as part of the modal component. And this is going to let you create dynamic snapping points to have a sheet come up over some interactive content. So you'd use the breakpoints property to pass an array of snapping points. And these are all the points on the screen that the sheet will snap to when you drag and let go. The initial breakpoint property is going to tell the modal the point at which to initially open up at. So if it was 0.1, it's going to open up at 10% of the modal height. So 10% of the modal will be visible. And then this backdrop breakpoint property is something we added pretty recently. And this was in response to user feedback. So for iOS users, if you have an iPhone and you use Apple Maps, there is a map that is interactive and then a sheet that appears over the map, but the map is still interactive. And so this backdrop breakpoint property lets you do exactly that. It lets you have a map that is interactive, but is still under a sheet. And as you drag the sheet up, the map no longer becomes interactive. So we have a lot more planned for bottom sheet, but I think this initial set of features is going to let developers build some really, really cool experiences. And we've already begun to see that from our feedback. So that's bottom sheet. One of the features that we haven't really talked about either at IonicConf or at our Q3 event earlier this year is the new declarative modals and popovers. So in Ionic 5 and previous versions, if you wanted to use a modal, you would import modal controller, do modal controller.create, and then you would do modal controller.present. It was a whole multi-step process, and it worked, but it was kind of tedious, and it wasn't what developers were expecting in modern applications. So in Ionic 6, you will be able to use modals and popovers declaratively in your application. And this is big for anyone using Ionic, but especially for Angular users. They haven't had this feature in any version of Ionic. And so what this means when I say declarative modals and popovers is you'll be able to open up your HTML template and just write ion modal and pass in an Angular component. And that's it. You don't need to import modal controller. You don't need to call modal controller.create. You don't even need to use our special API for creating a modal. You just create you just write ion modal. And so that's really nice. And that has a lot of good developer experience implications because you're working with the HTML element directly. So you can just set a class on the modal and it works. You don't need to use the CSS class property because you're passing in an Angular component. If you want to add properties, you can just set the properties right on the Angular component. You don't need to use our custom API for this. So the way I like to think of it is it's letting you focus on your application and let Ionic focus on how to create and present the modal. So we think that will be really, really popular feature. We're looking to add this feature to other overlays like alerts and action sheets, but we're looking to start with modals and popovers for now to collect some feedback and see how people are using them. And so, the example here is using a modal, but of course it's available on popovers. So popovers got a whole revamp of its own. In Ionic 5, when you presented a popover, the popover usually displayed right below a button, which was fine, but the feedback we received is that people want to be able to customize the position, the sizing, the alignment, all sorts of things with popovers. And so we're really excited to be adding a bunch of new features to popover. So the first is the side property, which lets you tell the popover which side of the button to show up on. So you could have it appear to the left of the button, on top of the button, on the right of the button, things like that. The alignment property also lets you align the popover with the button, so you can have them stay centered. You can align the left edges, you can align the right edges, all sorts of things. So a lot of different combinations. So when you have side and alignment together, you get a ton of different combinations for presentation. The other thing that we added, and this was a result of several years of feedback, was the size property. Usually when you make a drop-down menu, you have a button, say it's like 100 pixels wide. When you have a drop-down menu appear, you usually want that menu to be the same width as the button. And up until now, that was kind of challenging for developers. Developers would have to get the width of the button themselves and then set the width of the modal to be exactly that dimension. In Ionic 6, we've added a size property. And so when you set size equals cover, we will make the popover be exactly the same width as the button, which makes it really easy to build drop-down menus. The other thing that we've added here, and you can see the trigger property, I didn't really talk about that too much, but what the trigger property does is it lets you pass in the ID of a button. And when you click that button, the popover will automatically open and close. So you don't need to wire up a click event. You don't need to listen for any events. You just set the trigger to be the ID of a button and we take care of the rest. And that feature is also available for modals. So that's some of the new stuff coming in popover. We have a lot more. When Ionic 6 ships, we're going to be doing a whole blog where we really dive into each feature. So there's a whole lot more that's coming there. Okay. So we've talked a little bit about components and a lot about Angular, but I want to talk about Vue for a second. So when you navigate in Ionic Vue, say you click a button and you want to go to a page, you usually use the router link property, right? So you use router link equals page, and you can also use the router animation property to specify a custom animation. And that was fine for the most part, but what if you wanted to click a button, save some data or fire off a network request and then navigate while still controlling the animation? That wasn't really possible. And so in Ionic 6, we're going to be introducing a new use ion router injectable in Ionic Vue. And so what you'll be able to do is add this ion router injectable, and you will be able to programmatically navigate from page to page while having full control over the animation direction, and the navigation action, so push, pop, replace, things like that. This is a really powerful feature that is going to let you create a lot more dynamic, advanced scenarios, especially when you're like persisting form data or any kind of data to a database, and then going to another page. That is coming in Ionic Vue version 6. Platform detection. So we've had platform detection for as long as I can remember. And the features in platform detection have worked reasonably well. They let you detect, whether you're on desktop, mobile, iOS, Android, capacitor, Cordova, things like that. But the feedback we've gotten is in very special, unique cases, sometimes those platform detection methods don't quite work. And our feedback in the past has been, well, you can use another platform detection library. And that's worked, but it's never really been ideal. So in Ionic 6, you'll be able to customize the internals of our platform detection methods, right? So you'll be able to, as the example here shows, you'll be able to customize the criteria for what makes a device considered desktop. But you'll be able to use the exact same Ionic platform API. So you can still use is platform, all that other good stuff. What this also means is if you have a library, a platform detection library that you really like that isn't Ionic, you can plug that function in and consume it through the exact same Ionic API. So most developers won't need to touch this, but if you're building like a big enterprise app or you have to support, very, very specialized devices, this kind of functionality is going to be really, really powerful for making sure that your users get the correct UI components, the correct layout, the correct native functionality, and things like that. So that's platform detection. And one of the final features I'm going to be talking about today is the custom event interfaces. So in Ionic 5, say you have infinite scrolling, and when you get to the bottom, it fires off Ion infinite, and this function on the screen gets called, right? So you do some sort of loading process, and then you want to call the complete method. If you're using TypeScript, you've likely run into an error that says something along the lines of the complete method doesn't exist on the event target. And the reason for that is that complete method only exists on the infinite scroll component, but TypeScript doesn't know that. And so users typically in the past, they've worked around it, right? They've set the event to be of type any, they've typecast the target as something else. But on Ionic 6, we're going to be shipping custom event interfaces for every component that emits an event. And so what this means is in Ionic 6, in the onIonInfinite function, you'll be able to set the type to be IonInfinite custom events, and then call the complete method as you normally would, and TypeScript won't complain because TypeScript has all the information that it needs. It'll know that, oh, event.target is an infinite scrolling component, and infinite scrolling does have the complete method. So that was a nice little developer experience thing. We're really looking to improve the developer experience to make Ionic fun to build with. And I think this is something that's going to go a long way. Okay, so those are the new features coming. I want to talk briefly about performance before we get into the next thing. So if you've watched any of the other Ionic presentations this year, we've talked a lot about the custom elements build. And the custom elements build is really just like a marketing term. What that really means, the two big takeaways for users is when you upgrade to Ionic 6, your bundle size is going to get smaller, especially if you're using React or Vue. In Vue starter apps, we saw a pretty significant bundle size reduction of about half. So that's the first takeaway, is your apps are going to get a lot smaller just by updating. The second thing is you're going to be able to use other tooling like Vite, Rollup, ESBuild, Parcel2, all these sorts of other toolings that you haven't been able to use up until now. And this is a pretty big deal for React and Vue users, especially as things like Vite and Rollup get a lot more popular. So people have already started to use this, and the feedback has been really, really good. Bundle sizes are much smaller, apps are built way faster. So this is a really nice feature for Ionic that you get just by updating. So we've been talking a lot about features and the Ionic beta, but how's it been going? So since we announced Ionic 6 earlier this year, we've shipped 7 betas and 1 release candidate. So we're in the release candidate phase, which means no more features are going to be added. No more breaking changes are going to be made. We're really focusing on fixing bugs and getting this software ready for release. So we fixed over 50 bugs, added over 30 new features, some of which we didn't get to talk about today, but we will in the future. So everyone who has submitted feedback, filed issues, submitted code contributions, thank you so much. Ionic 6 would not be where it is today without all of your efforts. So you can get started with Ionic 6 today at our GitHub repo, so github.com/ionicteam/IonicFramework. And you can file any feedback you have on our GitHub repo. There is a Framework v6 Ionic 6 link in the README, which will show you how to get started. Okay, so when Ionic 6 ships later this year, that'll be great. You'll have all sorts of new features, but what comes after that? So there's 3 things I want to talk about. I can't give too much away, but we have a lot of things planned. So there's 3 things I want to mention. The first is when Ionic 6 ships, you can expect to see some pretty robust post-launch support in the form of patch releases. So when Ionic 6 ships, we'll be doing several patch releases, which will quickly resolve any lingering bugs. The second thing is we're going to be switching to yearly major releases. So Ionic 5 came out almost 2 years ago now. That's a pretty long time. So moving forward, you can expect to see a new major version of Ionic roughly every year. And this is mainly to get new features out the door faster and also get the iOS and Android design changes into the hands of developers sooner. So that's something that we're really excited about. And the final thing, and this is an ongoing effort that is going to take us into the next couple of years of Ionic, is we're looking to really modernize IonicFramework, especially in the realm of Angular and the Angular routing integration. There's a lot of, Ionic is almost 10 years old. There's a lot of code that's been there for quite some time, especially with Angular. And some of the feedback we've received is developers have some concerns around how the Angular routing behaves, especially with nested routing, auxiliary routes, and other things like that. And so moving forward, we're going to be looking to address some of those longer standing issues rather than add, a ton of crazy new features. We're going to continue to add new features, but we also want to pay special attention to modernizing the framework and making sure that the developer experience is really great and that Ionic is a pleasure to use. So those are the big three things. We're going to have a lot more to share in the coming months. So stay tuned for that, but we're really excited for that. So that's Ionic 6 in a nutshell. Thank you so much. Really excited to get Ionic 6 out the door. It's coming really soon, I promise. I don't have an exact release date to share, but it'll be this year. So that's it for me. I'm going to turn things back to Henk, who's going to help us get set up with the next part of the presentation.
Okay, thanks. If I may start with one question. I read on Twitter, you have some kind of special project with Met. Can you explain
Yes.
more?
Yeah, so we have an Enterprise App Summit conference coming up pretty soon at ionic.io/events. You can sign up there. So we're working on something special for that. I can't share too much, but we're working on a special application for that event.
Okay, no, we have to wait. All the questions.
With Angular 11, Tailwind support was added. Are there plans to probably for Ionic to use it too, or?
So I mean, we love Tailwind. We've seen a lot of community members integrate Tailwind with Ionic, and it's been pretty cool. In terms of adding official support for Tailwind in like an Ionic starter, we don't have plans for that right now. But of course, we're still engaging with the community and keeping an eye on things. Yeah,
I guess then you have the base should be utility classes too. So it would be a pretty big rewrite, I think. But yeah, we're pretty invested in keeping the iOS and Android designs and keeping those modern so that people can build really good native apps with web tech. Yeah, I already see the advantages, mainly with apps with big modules that the scoping can be maintained a lot better than like BAM or something. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Yeah, maybe a question just out of curiosity. Ionic version 6 was quite alright, I guess. What was the most complex component or tool that you worked on this version?
Oh, date time easily. The date picker is so complex. I built the date time picker in June. And then a week later, Apple announced iOS 15 and they completely redesigned the time picker again. So I had to go back and change it. That was really annoying. Yeah, I finished and I was like, you've got to be kidding me, Apple, come on. I just finished this last week. Yeah, the date time was really complex just in terms of the interactions, making sure that they were performant. And also adding all the different customization features. Date times look so different based upon where you are in the world in terms of languages, formats, displaying the month first, displaying the day first, things like that. So definitely date time was the hardest one.
And how do you make sure that everything works as expected? I'm not sure how good your unit test coverage is, but I can imagine that you need to test everything on real devices as well, right?
Yeah, so there's probably cases that we haven't quite covered yet. So when we build new components, we usually have some base acceptance criteria, and that acceptance criteria is based off what happens in like a native iOS or Android app. So for this, I consulted a lot with the calendar app on iOS because it makes heavy use of date and time pickers. So in terms of design, we base our designs off that. And then functionality is, we try to get as close to the same functionality as iOS, but at the end of the day, not just iOS users are going to be using our components. So where we can make improvements to the user experience, we do make those. We've got unit tests that test the basic functionality, the underlying utilities that parse dates, manipulate dates, and format dates. So we have a lot of tests for that. And then we have end-to-end tests, which will make sure that things are rendered correctly, the layout's correct, and that, you know, when you click buttons, things behave as you would expect. And then for accessibility, we have a lot of automated testing, but we do manual testing with VoiceOver, TalkBack, NVDA, and things like that.
Okay, cool. And from the end-to-end perspective, what are you using when we're talking about tooling or framework like Cypress or browser stack or combination of
So a few things. So for spec tests, we use Jest. We use a lot of stencils built-in testing. So we use Jest and Puppeteer. For some of the framework apps, so like the Angular test app, the Vue test app, we use Cypress. And then whatever spec testing comes with the framework. But yeah, Jest and Puppeteer are the two big ones right now.
What's the code coverage?
Oh, I don't know. I'm sure there's some that we haven't quite gotten. Given a component like datetime, there's no shortage of tests that we can write. But so far, it's pretty solid.
You're always bugging me. What's the code coverage? So
I don't know. It's an answer that is below 80. I have a question for the end-to-end testing. Do you also test it on native devices like Source Labs? You can do it in the cloud, which it does it in native devices.
Oh yeah. So we typically, when we're testing, we typically stay away from emulators just because they're exactly that. They're emulators. They're not one-to-one matches. I've got like 8 test devices in the other room. I have an iPhone 5S, an iPhone 7, 11, and 13. And then I have like some super random off-brand Android device, a Google Pixel. So most of the team members have some amount of test devices that we test on physically, especially for accessibility testing. Like if we're doing VoiceOver, you can't test that on an emulator. And so you need to have a physical device for that. So we do tend to prefer physical devices over emulators, but we'll use emulators to sort of fill the gaps where we don't have physical devices available.
And one more question. I have several apps, but most of them are still on Angular. Yeah, some are even 3, but most of them are on 4. What do you advise from going to 4 to 6 when it's out? Is there a go
from Ionic 4 to 6?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So from 4 to 6, well, I guess the first thing is we don't recommend going directly from 4 to 6 because you might miss some breaking changes. Probably the safest thing to do is go from 4 to 5, make sure everything's working, and then go from 5 to 6. So the 4 to 5 migration you can do today. And then when Ionic 6 comes out soon, then you can do the 5 to 6 migration. The feedback we've gotten from users with Ionic 5 is the Ionic 5 migration took about like 30 minutes to an hour for most cases. Usually less than an hour, though. The hour was more of an outlier. And so Ionic 6 is going to have even fewer breaking changes. So in theory, it should be a pretty quick migration.
Breaking changes, do you have like Angular has some automatic functionality to implement those changes for you? Do you have that too?
So with the Ionic 3 to 4 migration, we did have some automated scripts. The issue we ran into, and this was before I was at the company, so I'm getting secondhand information here, but my understanding is that it didn't quite work. And so I think with Ionic 6, we're going to play it safe. And while we won't have maybe automated scripts, most of the migrations could be done with a pretty quick find and replace. So we're not trying to make you rewrite your application. It should be small little things here and there.
Okay. Well, my experience was good with the Angular migration tool, but
yeah, we're going to have a full migration guide, like a step-by-step thing that you can follow, which is something that we actually haven't had in the past. So I hope that makes things a little bit easier, and hopefully people don't fall off the track with migration with that migration guide.
So whenever Google or Apple decides to change some functionalities on their end, let's take, for example, the date picker they did last year. What is the point that you guys decide to adapt the change and redevelop it on your end?
Yeah, so we try to keep those to major releases, especially if they're bigger changes like datetime. And Apple usually only does those big changes like iOS 14 to iOS 15. So we try to keep those to major releases. It's pretty rare that you'll see us make design changes between major versions. The only time we do that is if we implemented something wrong the first time. Like I think in Ionic 5, there was 1 or 2 small little details that we implemented incorrectly. And so we corrected it in a patch release, but it did result in a little bit of a design change. But for the most part, we want to keep those to major releases. In terms of new things that get added, not just like a redesign, we try to look and see if there is a common feature set across platforms. So for example, like if there's a new component added in iOS, if there's a similar thing added in Android and on the web, we'll usually add it. We're a little wary against adding very like platform specific features unless they're really popular. So for example, the that card style modal, that's very iOS specific, but it's so popular and it's used everywhere that it makes sense for us to add it. And so some of the new features we wait and see just to see how popular they get, and if it's something that okay, yeah, we should add it, we'll usually add it.
So you start developing those features right after the WWDC, for example, or you wait for first release candidate of the iOS version?
We usually start developing pretty quickly after the new version gets announced, but we also hold off a little bit because sometimes between releases of iOS betas, Apple does make changes. So we'll start like doing research and investigation, but we'll wait a few betas before we really jump into development.
Right.
I see a comment on the chat asking if new plugins were added in Ionic 6. Sounds like something with Ionic 6 and capacitor. Yeah, so capacitor 3 came out earlier this year. And one of the big things was plugins are split out into their own packages. So you can install like, capacitor / keyboards, capacitor / status bar for specific plugins. That was really nice because it reduced the bundle size and it lets you lazy load plugins and really only include exactly what you needed. Ionic 6 works great with capacitor 3. It works great with capacitor 2. I'm not super familiar with the new plugins added in capacitor 3, if there were any, just because I work on the UI layer, but Ionic 6 is fully compatible with capacitor 3.
I have a question about that that comes to mind. Are capacitor dependencies, are they also pre-shakeable? Because in that case, you just can import it and use whatever you want, and you don't have to worry about just picking the right packages.
For capacitor plugins or Ionic components?
Yeah, for capacitor, when you're using it in Ionic. So
yeah, so since everything is split out into separate packages, everything should be tree shakeable. So if you're not using the status bar plugin, it won't get included in your app.
Any questions?
Can I get a t-shirt like yours?
Yeah.
Yeah, when I come back out, when Ionic flies me out to you all, I'll bring some t-shirts. Oh, everyone wants a headband. My gosh, ever since Matt Kramer showed up with a headband on the stream, everyone wants a headband. We're looking into it. We have nothing to announce, but we know people are very passionate about the headbands.
Okay, the guitar pick.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks a lot. I will send you our voucher for the bagel shop, so you can go out for the bagels in Boston.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to it. Thank you. Thank you for having me. Very excited to get Ionic 6 out the door, and I'm glad you all are doing meetups again. This is great.
Nice. Okay, thanks. Thank you.
Ja. Okay, thanks.
En mute, en gelijk.
Zo.
Kan ik eruit knippen? Ja, maar je bent nog steeds niet gemute.
Nee?
Nee, je hebt je geluid wel uitgezet.
Nee, ik had het ook groen.
Ik heb mezelf nu even gemute hoor.
Ja, maar
Is het een beetje zichtbaar voor de mensen? Niet echt. Via video. Misschien moet hij iets meer recht voor.
maar jouw beurt, we kijken naar dat.
Ja, maar voor mensen thuis.
Ja, dat is
Goed? Oh ja, tuurlijk. Yes. Oké, thanks. Hi, even. Nee. Nu ben ik niet meer gemute. Nee. You can hear me, everyone, right? Yes. Great, thanks. Okay, thanks. Now, hi everyone. I'm Elwin van Ede. I will talk a bit about the 4days Express app, which we have developed at Pact. And we've used Ionic and Capacitor for this. A little bit about me. I'm Elwin van Ede, and I'm a senior front-end developer and Scrum Master at Pact.com. And I live in the Utrecht in the Netherlands. And I'm passionate about Vue, about Ionic and web components. And recently we have released the first version of the Graphite design system for Pact, which we've developed also with Stencil, which is used by Ionic for the UI components. And you can find me on Twitter with this handle. At Pact, I work with my team Falcon, for which I'm part of the team as a developer and Scrum Master. And we work on big projects for different clients. And recently we've worked for the 4days Express. And this is a non-profit, and they ensure children who have difficulty with language receive extra attention, and volunteers have 20 sessions with the family at their home or at a location or remote. And together with the parents, they work on language and reading with the kids. And for this, we've developed a portal. And this is for the project managers and the coordinators at the 4days Express. And with this, they can intake new volunteers and families. They can match them together and then monitor them on their track and progress. And besides this, for the volunteers themselves, we've developed an app with Ionic for both mobiles and tablets. And with this, volunteers can easily prepare sessions they will give with the children and evaluate them afterwards. And those evaluations are really valuable for the 4days Express, in which they can monitor the progress and the impact they have. And on 20 September, we've released the first version of this. And We now have more than 1,000 installations on Android and about 1,500 on iOS, both tablets and phones. So it's heavily used by all the volunteers. And now I will give a short demo of this app. And this way I'll have to connect my phone. Let's see if this works. Yes. Now here you have a recording of my screen on my phone. Oh. Oh yeah, that's it. Let me reshare my screen. Yes. So let me log out. We've used Auth0 for the secure login. And then you're logged in, and then when you're as a volunteer, you're matched with the family. You are notified of this, and you can plan your first visit with the family. Once you've done that with the contact information which is shown, you can insert a start date. Of course, with Ionic 6, we can use the new date time picker. Let's do today just for the demo, and then you can confirm it. It's sent to the backend, and then you have a started session, a track, and here you can see more information about the family, more contact information with the address, and it opens Google Maps. This is a fake address, so it doesn't find it. And you can phone them, that sort of stuff. And now the most important things are here in this card, like a session to prepare. And here you have some content with a video you can play and more information to prepare the session. And then once you've done the session, you have to evaluate it, and then you can give feedback with a smiley, which is animated. And once you select one, it animates a bit more. So it went super, and you can give some remarks if you want to. And then it's evaluated, and then you're at session 2, and you can prepare that session. And so we have 3 more sections, which is spice. This is something we are gonna add in the future, but the client wanted it to be already in the app that it's coming. And the knowledge bank and base, and this is like what I showed earlier, but then you can already go ahead if you want to, if it's a more advanced volunteer that wants to do session 7 earlier, for example. And then you have the questions and answers, and you can submit questions and get answers from colleagues or fellow volunteers. So that's a quick overview of the app which we've developed. Yes. Let me take some water.
One question.
Yes.
For their
Yeah, if it's a quick question, it can.
Quick question for you. Do you also have two-factor authentication?
No, but it's that's the added benefit of using Auth0 that has capabilities for that, so we can enable it in Auth0, and it's yeah, added.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
But you don't.
Not yet. No. It wasn't demand from the client, or yeah, it wasn't an issue. But like I said, we've used Ionic and Capacitor for this, and this allows all our web developers to work on it and allows us to develop and test in the browser. What I really like is the adaptive styling, which Liam mentioned. Yeah, like it adapts to the platform. Like for example, it adheres to both iOS human interface guidelines and the Android material design, depending on the platform on which you use the app. And users benefit from that because they're used to that and they have less friction. And we as developers can just use one code base instead of developing two separate apps. And for Capacitor, we really like that the native project is part of our code base, and we have control of this. If we want to change something, we can just look up the resources for Xcode or Android Studio instead of, for example, Cordova. And as a bonus, because it's web technology, we can use stuff like SVG animations with CSS. So that's really nice. We've used Ionic with Vue. This recently Ionic added official support for Vue 3, which we really liked at Pact because we are heavy users of Vue, and because of this, it became really interesting for us to use. And yeah, it was one of the first UI component libraries to support the newest version Vue 3, which was really great overhaul of Vue. And a lot of UI components are still not able to support Vue 3. But because Vue 3 uses web components, it was really easy for them to use Vue 3 or support Vue 3. And what's really nice about it is that it adds the composition API, which looks a bit or behaves a bit like React hooks, but just in a different way. And it allows us to group related logic together. And of course, it also adds better TypeScript support. And the Ionic components just feel like native Vue components, what we're used to. And what's really nice about Ionic is that they use the Vue ecosystem, like the Vue CLI and the Vue router, which we already are used to. And what's really nice also is in the design process, we use Figma, and at ionicfigma.com, you can download or purchase a design kit with smart Figma components of Ionic UI components. And this way I could really easily design or wireframe the app and introduce new changes. I can give a quick demo of this. Oh yeah. Let me just share. Here we have that app that designed in Figma. And with that design kit, I can easily add UI components from Ionic, like a card or a button. and you can easily change it to a different version, like a full width button. And this way I could easily wireframe it, and so it made the design process more efficient, but also the development, because the developers could easily look into the Figma file and see what components I used and use those components in the code.
Someone else in this group is using Figma this way.
We use it in the integration of our complete design system. So all things are landing. I think the storybook is the purpose now, but UI developers, they look into storybook and developers too. Yeah.
Cool.
And we also do use Figma at NS. Been used to sketch, Sketch, but
yeah,
Figma has a lot.
Yeah, you also have Ionic Sketch, and that's the components for Sketch. So if you use Sketch, you can use that.
Maybe that would have been a question for Liam, but is there a possibility to be that the Figma components can be exported to Ionic or to?
Yeah,
I don't know.
or official components from Ionic, which are more.
Yeah, which are supported by Figma.
Yeah, that would be nice, because this is from an external company, and of course when version 6 is there, it won't immediately be in Figma, I think. So it would be nice if Ionic supported it themselves, but of course this is already really helpful.
And they are working on Ionic Studio or Ionic Access.
Liam is responding.
Oh, okay, nice. Something they're looking into. Let me check. Yes, okay, cool. Something they are looking at with the stencil team. So a bit of an architecture overview. We have the Voice Express app, which is developed with Capacitor, Ionic, Vue, and TypeScript. And we connect to a REST API with which we've developed in Laravel, which is part of the Voice Express portal. And for authentication, we use Auth0 with OAuth 2.0 Pixie for optimal security. And we use the Capacitor plugin to securely store the tokens in the keychain and etc. And we've also connected with Contentful through a CDN for the content in the knowledge page, which I've shown. Yeah, and the Ionic scaffolding also uses Cypress for Vue. And this is what we've used for the end-to-end testing. And this is something I would also like to demo for a second. Let me see. This, I'm not really. How can I share my whole screen? Advanced. Ja, maar het hele scherm wil ik.
Dat is een optie voor.
Nou ja, ik doe dit wel.
Ja, oké.
Okay, here I share my terminal. And here I run my. Oh yeah, but I don't share my whole screen, so you won't see Cypress. Does anyone know how you can share your whole screen with Zoom? Ja, maar full screen, right? Ja, daar ben ik al hoor, maar nou ja, I'll stop sharing, but because I can't share my whole screen, I can't really demo this correctly, but it opens the browser and then tests the whole app.
You have to write your tests, just like, let's say, Karma from this.
Sorry?
The test.
Yeah.
That's right. Like using something like something different.
No, it's something from Cypress themselves in JavaScript files. Yeah.
Like
But
spec.tf files or something.
yeah, something like that. Yes.
And then use given them use cucumber for that.
Yeah. Okay.
It's really easy syntax. Like you can go to a URL and then do all sorts of isolation. Yeah, and it's really nice developer experience in my
framework.
Yeah, and you can also run it in CI of continuous integration, which gives me the next bridge to my next point. We also use GitHub Actions for our CI/CD. One workflow which we used is when we do pushes to our main branches or with pull requests. There we do a validation with linting and then end-to-end test with Cypress. And we also do a build to see if it succeeds. And another one, which we're really proud of, is that we've made a native app build workflow. When we do a push to our accept or master branch, it builds the app in the cloud without us having to do it ourselves. It doesn't, and the benefit of that is that we don't have to depend on one iOS or macOS developer, which has a macOS laptop for Xcode. And it's a lot of tedious steps which you have to always do. And this way it is fully automated. And when they've built it, it also uploads it to App Store Connect and the Play Console. So we can really easily push it to test flights or Android testing. And we also get an automated Slack workflow message in Slack that it's uploaded and we can use it. And finally, it creates a Sentry release and uploads the source map. So we have usable stack traces in Sentry exceptions. Yeah, that's about it. So any questions?
Yeah, but that's not AppFlow, right?
No.
Why not using AppFlow?
We looked into it, but the costs were a bit high for us. Yeah, that was the main reason. And someone from our team had a really good experience with GitHub Actions, so we went that route. But yeah, AppFlow is also a really nice solution that automates a lot of this.
Yeah. AppFlow is also useful for updates without apps.
Yeah, I know, but yeah.
Then you could use the Microsoft version. What is it? App Center, yeah.
Yeah.
I do with my own apps to just update the apps.
But we didn't really feel the need for it. Yeah, it's nice for bug fixes, but
yeah,
just for new features, it's in my opinion better to do a regular update.
Also, you can also do A/B testing.
Yeah, it's also really nice. Yes, yeah. So we looked into it, but eventually we didn't decide to use it, mainly because of the cost. But yeah. Any more questions?
You mentioned building the app via the cloud, so that there's no need for this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
What tool do you use for that? You mentioned.
Sorry,
what tool do you use for that?
GitHub Actions, that is and then with macOS runners, that they are more expensive, but yeah. So it adds up, but yeah, it's not that.
So basically, you develop that flow yourself and use it for multiple projects, probably.
Yeah, and we can now reuse it for future projects with Ionic and Capacitor. Yes.
Cool.
Yeah. Without. The GitHub Actions are costing some money to run, but that's manageable for us. Yeah.
So do you have all test versions running through App Center or TestFlight, or do you have indeed Microsoft App Center has some sort of internal tooling inside of GitHub Actions to test could be on devices without being dependent on maybe Apple needing to approve a beta version of your app?
Well, with the benefit of the App Center of Apple, if you have internal testers, that doesn't have to go through the beta review of Apple, so you can really easily test it on your own device. And for external testers, it has to go to beta review, but mostly most of the time it's within a few hours it's approved and it's go ahead. And also new builds of the same version which already has approved of Apple don't need to go through beta review again. So only after we have released to the App Store, we create a new version, and then one time we have to go to beta review, and then if we do iterations, it's just instant. So in our process, it wasn't really an issue.
We're not making use of the ad hoc provision profiles. We have to provision devices and stuff like that.
No. Yeah, done that few years ago, many years ago, and that wasn't really really cumbersome. Yes. Yeah, and that's also one of the main benefits, in my opinion, of Ionic, that most of the development and testing you can just do in your browser, and then also, of course, you have still to test it on your device, but also because Xcode is part of your, you can just access your Xcode project. You can just when you have your phone connected through USB, you can just run it on your device and test it in that way. So yeah.
And how do you make use of different environments? Say connecting to a development environment or the backend application. How do you manage that?
We have we call it an accept environment, or sort of a staging environment is that, and our test flight builds, or in practice all our native builds that go through Xcode are connected with that environment, so that has to be up to date with the API to be used by the app, and we can test it on that. And if you do a merge to our accept branch, then it builds it for that environment, and if you do a merge to master, it builds it for production.
So in TestFlight you have like 4 apps, test app, accept.
No, we all our TestFlight builds are connected with our accept environment, and if we don't push a TestFlight version to production, but we build it again for production. So
and then you skip the acceptance.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. That's just how the environment is done at our company. So we had to adjust to that. Yeah.
But you need to do it at build time, or
No. At build time you decide which environment you choose, right?
Yeah, it's default. It's accept environment, so our staging environment, and only when we do a merge to master or push to master, it's the GitHub Actions builds it with the production environment, and then we can submit it to the App Store or the Play Store.
Yeah, okay, but you have one single record in the App Store.
Yeah.
So it can be possible that you are by accident pushing the acceptance build, right?
To production.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's one of the downsides of our workflow. Yes.
So you could create another record and be safe.
Yeah.
One question: which version of Ionic are you on?
5. Yeah.
Do you also use the dark light theme, that stuff, or?
No, because it wasn't like a requirement of the client, and also the target audience isn't really demanding it that we know of. Plus, yeah, it would create more work for us to design for the dark modes that it all looks good. So we didn't support it, but with Ionic, it's really easy to support it. Yes.
Okay. Maybe a question about Cypress. You're also using Cypress to test the web part, and we're also using test plugin, and we know that we have to mock things out. We cannot test with Cypress. Did you encounter any problems with Cypress in your stack?
Yeah, well, we mock all the backend responses, so it's not truly end-to-end in that regard, but and also the authorization we mock, like we that's something we manually test. But aside from that, we don't really use a lot of native capacitor plugins. Yeah, we use the in-app browser for authentication. And also to securely storage the tokens. But
I had problems with that with Cypress, with accessing the right tokens, because Ionic uses SQLite database, I think, and we had a problem accessing the right version of the database. Is that a common thing?
No, because we don't really test that part in Cypress. So yeah.
You didn't test probably the login.
No.
Yeah. Well, go ahead. You'll find out.
Yeah.
But I was wondering, maybe if somebody had encountered it too, maybe you have a.
Think about it.
Yeah.
We use index.db.
Yeah.
The Ionic storage plugin.
Ionic, yeah.
We did something with it in Cypress as well. So.
Yeah, but you just called the Ionic storage API itself from Cypress.
I made a plugin, I guess, or a command in Cypress to clean the index.db storage.
To clean it.
Yeah.
So all the databases are called gone.
Yeah. So every time I start with
green, start with the green. That's good.
Okay. Liam told in the chat that there's a community plan for AppFlow, so that's nice.
It is not in the SQLite database. Yeah. So that is an issue. If you store the tokens there.
That's why I'm doing it there too.
Yeah, because then it's more secure.
People say, hey,
I'm logged out. Yeah, and then you log out because the phone is actually getting full and the app is cleared and everything's gone.
Yeah, and someone asked in the chat, how do you manage your design tokens in Figma and how do you use them in your code? Yeah, well, it was just once to define all the colors in Figma and then once to define them in CSS in Ionic, and yeah, it's not something we regularly change, so it wasn't an issue for us. But yeah, if you regularly change that, then it could be nice to have some automation in that. But it wasn't really an issue for us. So. Okay. Thanks.
Thanks so far.
Before I go ahead.
I've got another presentation. Edwin, thanks a lot for
Yes.
giving us this presentation.
Thanks. Oh.
I think it was a really interesting reference case and a lot of great concepts in the app as well and the technology that you use. So
Yeah,
thanks for joining me.
Yes, thanks for asking.
Do you want anything to go? What was it really about? Yeah. So everything has an end?
No, sausage that has to.
So thanks. Final last word from your side.
Yeah, just wait that you close it.
Make them wise.